Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this second summit on our psionic moment. You'll recall that about a month ago we had our first psionic summits, and it was so successful. And we got so many requests for a follow-on that we decided that before world events overtook us, we would convene a second one with most of the people who were participating in our first Psionic Summit, but then a few others who we feel will be very additive to our program. We went for nearly 4 hours the first time. There was just so much to say, and we decided to just let it go to its natural conclusion. This time, we're going to be much more disciplined. We know it's a Sunday, so we're going to keep it to no more than 90 minutes max. And we want to thank everyone for joining and for our live streaming partners and all the people who are getting involved with this seminal issue of our time. As we, I think, all agreed in the first summit, we are in a very nuanced and increasingly potentiated psionic moment, where after nearly 80 years of active, coercive repression of the UFO, UAP domain that was so effectively orchestrated that even if you talked about UFOs or UAP, you were considered crazy in one way or another. And it was essentially a topic that was not welcome at any level in American and in most societies around the world. But that didn't mean it wasn't true. And there's something about truth that in the end, the truth will out. That's just the nature of truth. Whatever the forces of darkness and whatever the forces of repression, in the end, reality speaks for itself. And we humans, as part of reality, all of us have an intuitive sense of what's true. And we experience this all the time, where whatever our head says, whatever we're watching on the news, whatever the commercials are leading us to believe, at some deep level, there's a natural law. There's a natural intuitive sense of the truth of the matter. And I think that has been principally responsible for the inexorable coming into the light of day of the most closely held secret, possibly in the history of our species. And over the last 4 or 5 years, since that New York Times article in December of 2017, the pace has quickened. And more leading specialists, more and more parliamentarians around the world, people in the intelligence community, people in the military community, people who have been privy to inside information have been coming out to say they're here. There is zero doubt. The United States and other governments have retrieved craft, retrieved biologics, and the reality of our reality is that we are not alone. That extraterrestrial beings, and I use that term inclusively of all these intelligences that we're encountering from other star systems or other dimensions, they're not only here, but they've been in contact and communication with people all over the world with a very common message. And we are now at that psionic moment where people around the world are coming to the conclusion that I think most fundamentally, we don't need the government's approval anymore as to whether this is true. Since we know this is true, we need to get upon the business of getting to know these beings, who they are, why they're here, and what ethical norms and guidelines should inform humanity as we initiate contact. Toward the end of our Psionic Summit in February 23rd, we came to a very interesting dialogue between the principals about these matters after all of us agreeing that the psionic moment is now something that humanity should embrace. So we literally want to start this summit where we left off. And we ended up with a conversation, just to recall it momentarily, about the nature of these beings and whether they were benign or whether they were not so benign, and what their motives were, and whether love is the disposition of being that we humans should manifest in the face of what essentially we really don't know very much about. Or should we be afraid? Is this really a national security issue? So we are going to jump right in. And we thought it would be good to start with Richard Dolan, the great historian of the UFO phenomenon, as you all know, who's written a number of books, including a book on the aliens themselves. So we're going to start with Richard, and then we'll hear from Sean Hesburn-Hargens that I'll introduce in a moment, and then we'll just open it up to a dialogue of the principals on this call. But Richard, thank you for joining us today, and why don't you just lay out what you think as objectively as you can is the disposition of the matter in terms of who they are and what their motives seem to be.
Hi, Jim, and thank you everyone for having me here. It's always a pleasure to be part of the Ubiquity panels, and also with all of the other wonderful panelists who are here with me. Yeah, we ended the last session about a month ago with, I wouldn't want to say that I took exception to some of the things that were said, but maybe to offer a different perspective. Jim, earlier you mentioned the benefits of embracing this opportunity. I wouldn't say embrace, I would say explore would be a different way that I would put it. When I think of these beings that are clearly interacting with humanity and with this world, I still don't know, like, if I have a very strong opinion that they are good, as we would put that word, or bad, as we would put that word. What I tend to think, and in fact, this is a feeling, a conclusion that's become stronger over the years, not weaker, is that we're dealing with physical beings from another place in the universe. That is, not another dimension, but another point of origin, like a planet. Now, why do I believe that? We have a decent understanding of, not perfect, but a decent understanding of how life originated on Earth itself. We have a decent understanding of the progression of how that life moved through the eons. And it seems to me that life is something that naturally will start in the universe, any place in the universe, given the right conditions. Those conditions are rare, but the universe is big enough that those conditions will exist in many, many, many places, including in our own galaxy. And furthermore, it's my own belief that not only is life naturally harbored in the universe, but intelligence is. I think intelligence is a natural adaptive trait to all forms of life. You know, we're not the only intelligent form of life on this planet. The fact is, all other forms of life on this planet are intelligent to varying degrees, including plants. Plants can communicate through underground fungi systems. We know this. We know that every animal that exists has some kind of, at least most mammals will have a brain, reptiles have brains to organize information. That's intelligence. Intelligence is a natural function of all life forms because life competes for resources. And in order to win, not lose that competition for resources, one of the things they develop is intelligence. It's just a natural thing. And I have to assume this occurs everywhere else in the universe. So that another planet that has conditions similar to Earth will, more likely than not, I think, develop highly advanced intelligent life at some point or another. So my opinion is that there are many, many examples in this universe and certainly in this galaxy of highly intelligent, very advanced technological life. And then the only question then is, you know, is it easy or not easy for them to find us and to come here? And I don't fully know the answer, but it seems to me that if you figure out a couple of things, space-time manipulation being the most obvious one, that, yeah, they could probably find us and come here, maybe without that much difficulty. And so for me, the easiest explanation for what we are dealing with in terms of the UAP or UFO phenomenon is extraterrestrial entities that are, to some extent, biological, maybe cybernetic, artificially enhanced in all kinds of ways, yes, but physical. And so now that doesn't mean that I don't think there is an interdimensional aspect to this phenomenon or to the phenomenon of our reality. I guess what I question is whether that interdimensional aspect is actually related to what I, for many years, have called UFOs or UAP. Are they part of the same phenomenon? Are they the ones? I just finished a very long study of USOs, water-based phenomenon. Every one of those incidents that I've looked at seems to indicate a physical craft, physical beings to the extent that they're seen. Now, I think it's important to indicate that consciousness, telepathy, are deeply embedded in the very physical aspect of what we call UFOs. I think it's not even controversial to say that telepathy is probably the primary method of communication among aliens, or certainly between humans and aliens. There's been an extensive amount of research on this by many people, including Kathleen, who I'm sure was here, who could speak to this, that telepathic communication is more normal than not. I would also add that the idea of a collective consciousness, or you can say a hive mind, is very likely also a big part of the alien consciousness network, if we can call it that. I recall even when Ingo Swann's work, and I actually got to talk to Ingo about this on one occasion, the idea of telepathy as a universal language. This was something that Ingo believed, I think, very, very definitely. So that it operates through consciousness, implying, I think, that it is not exclusive to humans, but a potentially universal system used by advanced beings. I happen to think that that sounds very logical to me. So all of those, I think, leave the door wide open for some kind of psionics to be employed in our interactions with these other beings that presumably are behind the UAP or UFO phenomenon. I would just add, though, you know, in certain disciplines, there are splitters and lumpers. So lumpers are and you get this in many, many disciplines, who will group together different phenomenon as one phenomenon. And so in this field, we might say that lumpers would be those who say, well, those that are coming from another dimension are basically it's the same as those coming from another planet, and it's really all part of one phenomenon. Like ghosts or messages from the dead even might be part of the same phenomena that we talk with UFOs. Well, I would call myself a splitter in that regard. I think that and I'm going to end it here and leave this to everyone else to talk about if they want. But I think that in certain cases, when I encounter people who've said that they've had communication with this or that particular entity, I'm not necessarily disputing that they've had it, but what I do wonder is, are they actually having that communication with genuine alien beings, or is there something else going on? I don't mind saying I firmly believe in a lot of these aspects. I am convinced, for example, that my deceased father did in fact leave a message for me and my wife Tracy at his moment of death 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I have no problem talking about it, but I don't think that's related to the UFO issue. So I think that there may be a variety of realities that we tend to be dealing with when we discuss these things. And for my part, I certainly don't think it's illegitimate for anyone to get into and explore the phenomenon of, let's say, telepathic communication with other beings. But I'm just not sure that I would consider that part of the genuine UFO or UAP phenomenon. Maybe yes, but maybe no. So there's a lot going on. I think it's a nuanced reality that we're dealing with. All of it is worth exploring. And I guess I'll just leave it there for now.
Thank you, Richard. I hadn't taken in the splitters and the lumpers. That's a very uh, uh, interesting and I think incisive way to uh, begin our conversation about this extraordinarily nuanced phenomenon that is not as real and palpable as we would all like it to be, because there's a certain gossamer quality to these experiences. And it's certainly true, we're all like the blind people and the elephant on these matters. And it's in that spirit that I'd like to now bring in Sean Hesburn Hargens, who was with us last time with the California Institute of Human Science. A fabulous program there at the Institute on these matters, who's done a whole taxonomy of the UAP. And Sean, given Richard's point about his distinction on, physical beings as opposed to dimensional beings, and wanting to also separate the ghosts and the ancestors and other spiritual intelligences, shall we call them. Where do you come out specifically on where the ETs fit in this overall scheme of things?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Richard. Yeah, Richard's comments are a perfect kind of segue into, a few points I wanted to make. And so I'm going to kind of use, a few minutes to just kind of like complexify the space because I think that there's so much going on. And I think Richard's right. We gotta kind of zero in on, what exactly are we talking about here? Because we often talk about the phenomenon, capital P, and that includes everything under the sun, right? Every paranormal or transpersonal or mystical experience is tied up into what we experience as the phenomenon. So I'm a mapper. I like to try, so I'm a splitter. I'm not a lumper. And I try and, just really dive into the details to understand all the differentiations and all the distinctions and all the different kinds of experiences people are reporting. And so I'm going to share my screen and share a couple different documents real quick. Not to go into the details of the document, but just to hopefully give you an emotional and cognitive sense of the level of complexity we're dealing with. A couple years ago, I wrote an article called Our Wild Cosmos, with cosmos spelt with a K, to not just refer to kind of the physical cosmos, but all the dimensions of the cosmos, the subtle realms and, the different dimensions and all of that. So cosmos, kind of in the widest, most inclusive sense, metaphysically, spiritually, and physically. And I refer to the paper, it's like a 50-page article, as Our Wild Cosmos because it's wild in the sense that there we're living in this multidimensional multiverse, and there are so many different types of intelligences in this multidimensional multiverse, right? And as Richard was saying, like, there's so many different kinds of entities and beings that are encountered and described. There's fairy beings and elementals and nature spirits. There's what we call aliens and, ETs, or what I tend to call extraterrestrials, and I'll go more into that in a moment. There's angels and demons, there's ghosts, there's Bigfoot and Sasquatch, there's Dogman and other cryptids, there's egregores, which are like collective types of intelligences and like tulpas. And, there's, and there's, as Richard's pointed out in his writings, the alien agenda, that, a lot of these ETs actually seem to be human, or so close to human that, it's almost like there's alternate humans, like galactic humans, not just Earth humans. And so there's a lot of entities out there, and they do they do seem to show up and be part of the UFO phenomenon in various ways, like Stan Gordon's work on Bigfoot and UFO encounters, right? And the exact relationship between all of this is far from clear. And I think that's why we tend to just call it the phenomenon, because in a way it's pointing to all the things that scientific materialism has no room for, right? And but as soon as we open Pandora's box, a whole bunch of stuff comes out. So when I wrote this article a couple years ago, here, I'm going to share my screen. Part of it was doing this kind of meta-analysis of 12 major sources in the UAP, NHI, non-human intelligence space, and then looking at what are the different types of entities that are described in those books or in that research. And as you can see here, there's a chart of 25 humanoid types of beings, and then a handful of non-humanoid types of beings, and so there's a lot that's reported in the experiencer literature of different types of, and these are all described as being extraterrestrial, right? Either physically or interdimensionally. But here we even see, like, number 17, we see elves and fae and the she. So even in the UFO context, sometimes people will encounter these types of beings, they will describe them as such, and they will think of them as being extraterrestrial in some sense. And interestingly, human-looking extraterrestrials are the most commonly reported. And Richard has a whole chapter in his book kind of highlighting and emphasizing that, which I think is really worth considering. And then we have kind of the classic five: reptilians, short grays, tall grays, insectoids, or mantids, hybrids, and so forth, right? So that's just to give you kind of a quick sense of that there's a lot of different types of beings that fall within the UAP NHI literature as extraterrestrial, or what I call exoterrestrial. And I use exoterrestrial to include both the physical beings, which I think of as extraterrestrial, and the interdimensional beings that are not necessarily physical, or they might be physical somewhere in the multiverse, but we might be interacting with them through their subtle body, their astral form, or so forth. So there's a lot of possibility. It's pretty overwhelming. So I'm going to share my screen again and show you another document that I've been working on. And this is basically the 35 plus extraterrestrial hypotheses that I've come across over the last 5 years of, diving into all of this. And I've clustered them into like the, I think there's 5 main clusters. There's extraterrestrial, so biological hypothesis. And there's 9 different hypotheses there that, talk about different types of extraterrestrials, right? The crypto-terrestrial, intraterrestrial, like they're living inside the Earth, the artificial intelligence hypothesis, the SETI hypothesis that they're out there, they're just really, really far away, and so forth, or the shadow biome hypothesis that they're here, but they're living in some kind of shadow biome that we generally can't perceive. And then you have the interdimensional hypotheses, and you have 8 of those, right? So a whole lot of different ways of thinking about interdimensional beings in this context. Then we have Vallée's control system hypotheses, and we have another 8 kind of major types of hypotheses trying to describe those possibilities. Then we have the alternate human hypotheses, right? The dark military hypothesis, the breakaway civilization hypothesis, the hollow earth hypothesis, the transcension hypothesis, and so forth, or the time traveling extratempestural hypothesis. And then we have a handful of prosaic explanations, right? So anyways, again, the point of all of this is just to say there are over 35 theories about these beings in a UFO NHI context. But I think to Richard's point, we got to get better at trying to discern which ones are dealing with physical beings, which ones are dealing with interdimensional beings, which ones are dealing with different types of subtle beings that maybe aren't even appropriately thought of as extraterrestrial or exoterrestrial. But then when we look at the patterns of all those 35 hypotheses that I just quickly went over, and we say, where are they from? Well, some theories say they're from here, either on the surface of the Earth or inside the Earth. Some theories say they're extraterrestrial, meaning that they're on other planets far away. And some say they're ultra-terrestrial, like they're from other dimensions. So basically, all three major possibilities are covered in those theories above. Similarly, when we ask ourselves, what time are they from? Some theories say they're ancient, some say they're contemporary, some say they're future. So again, we're kind of covering every possibility. When we ask what type of consciousness are we dealing with, again, some theories are highlighting human consciousness, some are highlighting non-human intelligence, and some are suggesting artificial intelligence. So again, kind of the three main possibilities are represented in those theories. When we talk about what types of bodies do they have, some say they're physical, some say they're physical and energetic, some say they're just energetic, some say they're, light and subtle. And then just dropping down to number 6, what intentions do they have? The theories above suggest they have good intentions, that they have neutral intentions, they have bad or nefarious intentions, and some of them are just such tricksters that we couldn't even really tell what their intention is, other than to give us a bit of a headache and a runaround. And then with types of craft, is it our craft? Is it their tech? Is it energetic or is it organic? So there's just so much going on. It's a wild, wild cosmos, right? And, so there's at least, 10 major types of extraterrestrials, extratempestrals, cryptoterrestrials, extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, intraterrestrials, breakaway civilization, angels and demons, psychopomps, a control system, or a simulation. So when we ask ourselves, what's the ethics of how we interact with these beings, I think we have to get more clear, like, well, what beings are we talking about in this huge map of possibilities? And I think this just goes so far beyond our current ethical frameworks. I think we have a lot of work cut out for ourselves to try and begin to articulate, ethical understandings. And I think part of the issue, and I really want to give Richard credit for this, and then this is the last thing I'm going to say, and we'll open it up, is there are not a lot of books or efforts made at trying to understand the psychology and spirituality of these beings and the motives of these beings, right? Even if we contain ourselves to the exoterrestrials, or even within that, the extra terrestrials. And, Richard's book, The Alien Agendas, is one of about 3 or 4 books that does a good job of starting to try and understand and speak to this area. In fact, I'm teaching a course in a couple of weeks that starts at the university on exopsychology. Like, what is the psychology of these beings? What can we say about them? What tools and concepts can we use to try and understand the psychology and emotions and cognitive capacities and, psi abilities of these beings? And Whitley Strieber's last 2 books is also venturing into this domain of how might we, based on the reports, the interactions to date, how might we start to infer and understand the motives, the psychology, the emotions, the spirituality. So I think we're just beginning to start to talk and think about those questions, and doing so within an ethical context. So thanks, Jim, for having me. Thanks, Richard, for teeing me up with a number of your comments, and excited to have a dialogue with everyone.
Thank you so much, Sean. Just stay on for a moment, because I think what you and Richard have laid out is in some ways really humbling. We literally don't know what we don't know. And what you're doing, and Richard and I think some others, is just starting to quantify the little bits and pieces.
Yeah, let's get clear on, like, what are we dealing with?
Yeah,
like,
what are we
all
even
the
dealing with here?
possibilities?
Yeah. And so just a quick question on the your taxonomy. If you had to just quickly guess, I guess would be the most one can do, of all those options, given what you know, and maybe this is where Kathleen Marden would come in as well, where's the preponderance of experiences in the UFO, UAP, ET domain, leaving aside the ancestors and the ghosts and the fairies and the elves and
Right.
other aspects of the invisible realm. Would you tend to agree with Richard that what he's talking about with the UFOs and the UAP and the USOs, that these are physical beings from other star systems, not so much multidimensional? Would you tend to agree with that based on your data?
Yes and no. So, yeah, I think there's a really major slice of the phenomenon that is physical and flesh and blood and connected to other planets and other, systems, and are using craft that are technological in some sense, though they're generally interfacing with consciousness. So I think that is a really big part of what we're talking about. That said, I think there's also a lot of ETs, just to use that nomenclature, that interact with us through their subtle bodies. And so there might be physical beings on their planets far away, but they're interacting with us through subtle bodies, and we're interacting with them through our subtle bodies, through dreams, through out of body experiences, and so forth. So I think there's another layer of the phenomenon. I mean, the first layer is they're physical beings that are here or coming here in physical craft or technological craft or maybe energetic craft, and interacting with us physically. So that's one layer. Then there's another layer of physical beings elsewhere that are using modes of consciousness and subtle bodies and stuff to interact with us in our modes of consciousness or in our subtle bodies. And so the experience is largely non-physical, even though it's anchored kind of on both ends with physical realities, right? And then there's another bucket of experiences where I think some of these beings are maybe best not thought of as having physical bodies in the way we think of it, but maybe having different types of subtle bodies, which, if you look at the descriptions that they provide and that people provide of some of those beings, they experience themselves as having a physical body, but we would consider that body a subtle body or a light body, right? So I think there's different
Yeah,
points
gotcha.
of reference as to what's physical and not physical. So just these three buckets, and I think there's a couple others, these three buckets really start to complexify how dynamic this is, and where the line is between physical and non-physical is not always so clear.
Exactly. Thank you, sir. We'll circle back to you
Okay.
momentarily, but I'd like to now bring in Kathleen Marden, who has conducted research, as many of you know, with experiencers, by the thousands all over the world for many, many years. And we'll get to the ethical guidelines and so forth later on in the program. But right now, we simply want to focus our attention on who are these beings? Who are we dealing with here? And so, Kathleen, based on what Richard has said and now Sean has illuminated, and based on your own research, how would you answer the question of who are these experiencers that you've studied by the thousands? Who are they dealing with? You're on mute.
Thought I had. Okay, I'm sorry. That's a complex question. And first, I want to thank you, Jim and Richard and Sean, for your comments. It's food for thought, and certainly we don't have all the answers, and that's what keeps us interested and doing our research. To date, I've worked on 4 studies on experiencers, amounting to about 6,000 at this point. 3 of those studies were with PhD academics and lay researchers. So I have a little insight into that. And also, I was the Mutual UFO Network's director of the experiencer research team for 10 years. So we talked to a few thousand experiencers during that time. And I've worked independently and also as a hypnotherapist. And I'm the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. I've had my own experiences as well. And I am an experimenter. So I've just sort of put everything I could possibly think of together in search of answers. Got over the materialistic view of all of this quite a long time ago, when I realized that it was far more than nuts and bolts. But when, according to the individuals who have taken part in the studies, and I want to add in my own family's experiences as well, there is a very broad spectrum of what is occurring. We do seem to have a physical component. There are physical craft, at least they seem physical, to experiencers who are taken there. But then we have the question of how this craft can appear to be very, very small, yet when they're taken inside of it, it's suddenly very large. And how are they taken there? They're somewhere in the physical. They might see an orb, a light orb that seems to have intelligence. They might encounter, and usually will encounter, a beam of light, and they might see orbs in that beam of light. They would be absorbed into that light and find themselves in what they believe is a physical structure. They can feel the texture of the floor. They can see the lighting in the walls. They can feel the surface. They can describe what has happened during their time on that craft, whether, it be they are subjected to physical examinations, to tissue samples being taken from their bodies, to being educated, to even learning how to fly a craft with their minds, depending upon the level of experiencer that they are. But they returned to their environment as if only a moment has passed, but then they realize by their watches or their clocks that it's been on the average of 2 hours or more. And they find marks on their bodies. And these are patterned marks. And these particularly mystifying patterned marks are found on individuals around the world. They might remember observing symbols on the craft. And Dr. Don C. Donderi, Dr. Stuart Appel worked with Bud Hopkins on 2 symbol studies where people who were on these craft had been shown symbols, some kind of ET language, although most of the communication has been reported as telepathic. But there's this, these written symbols that are observed. And in these symbol studies, the researchers discovered that it appears that alien abduction is real because the symbols sketched by the experiencers in hypnosis are very, very much alike, but very different than the symbols of the control group and of students who were hypnotized and told that they were on a craft but were not. So there's a lot of evidence there. You have to think about the implants that Dr. Roger Lear studied, one that would transmit into deep space, those that had isotopic ratios from outside this planet, nanotechnology beyond our capabilities at that time. So we have that physical component. There's so much of it to that. And so where are these ETs coming from? They've shown about 12%, according to our studies, star maps, maps that indicate where they're from. So let me skip beyond that now. I'm talking about the physical aspects. But then as part of that, we also have what appears to be some kind of interdimensional, trans-dimensional component. Maybe, you know, I know it can all be explained by physics. I've talked to physicists about this, how people could pass through solid surfaces using advanced technology. We're not there yet, but we've done it on a very small scale at the CERN. So it all is possible within our understanding of physics. Then we have to get into other types of contact, because people see craft just sort of fading in and out of existence. They might be somewhere, perhaps in their home, and they might have had this physical contact for many, many years of their lives. But now these unseen entities are coming into their environment and communicating with them telepathically. And then when this happens, they're hearing high-pitched tones in their heads only at the time that this is happening, and also are receiving telepathic communication. So they can communicate back and forth. And sometimes these experiencers who have this happen observe orbs. Sometimes they see what looks like it might be a shadow. When they have that very strong tingling sensation through their bodies, I have been told that this is a higher dimensional entity who has come into our environment and into our auric field. And so that might be what is happening. But I find it fascinating because the people who are having these experiences are also sensing a euphoria, a euphoric feeling in the presence of what this is. And the temperature around them, the temperature in the room elevates at the same time. So there is some scientific evidence that can be measured, as well as observers or groups who are having these encounters together. And then you have to move on to those who are having conscious contact through meditation, where it's a silent group meditation. People try to learn to have sort of a collective conscious mind where they can go to the same place, where they can interact with the same beings. When they discuss it later, there's an overlap in where they've been and what they've done. You find this kind of synchronicity occurring. Sometimes people who do this, and they do it quietly and through deep meditation, can even call in craft that could have appeared to be physical, or could be translucent initially, and then over time enlarge and become physical. So it's extraordinarily complex. And so this is where I'm going to stop for now and give somebody else a chance.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's complex indeed. And this is one reason we wanted to start everyone with Richard and Sean and Kathleen. We wanted to give people a sense that this is a very rich and textured landscape, this domain of psionics, because when we start to think about how we want to begin to interact with these beings through the psi that's available on both sides, we have real complexities to deal with. And as I've said before, we literally don't know what we don't know. Kathleen, I'll circle back to you in a few minutes here, but we want to now
Thank you.
turn to some people who are well known to have had very deep experiences with these beings. And we're going to bring in first Chris Bledsoe, and then Bertie Jaworski and David Clements from our first Psionics summits, who have had deep experiences of these beings. So, Chris, given what you just heard of this taxonomy that we're dealing with, who do you think you're actually encountering when you do the orbs and you commune with Our Lady? Where in this taxonomy do you find yourself for your particular encounters?
I believe that what I'm dealing with are spiritual beings made of light. They come in orbs. They're the biblical angelic beings that they talk about in the Bible. That's my thought on this thing. And I'm like Sean, there's a lot going on out there. There's some of everything. You can't get around it. And in fact, my time studying at NASA with Tim Taylor, he was the first one to tell me that he said there's a whole lot going on, layers upon layers of things going on here. But the reason I was at NASA there was because of these what they call plasmoids that are they were seeing these things, and astronauts too, and so they wanted to know what I knew about them. And through all that study, um, he told me it was just like the Bible. So I've been in that mindset because of the way they interact. They come in prayer. Jeff Kripal calls it prayer through telepathy. But when I call on them, I do it just like you would with, I always call the lady. I don't call on angels. I don't call on beings or extraterrestrials. I have no experience in that. I go out and I ask the Holy Spirit if she would share her presence or send her angels. And that's when these lights start coming. And I have hundreds of witnesses. In fact, hope this week we have a little more than 300 or 400, maybe 500 people show up for a sky watch this weekend, and hope we make believers out of all of them. But I can't speculate on all that other stuff. It's all speculation, guessing what it might be. The only thing I can do is give you 18 years of evidence and witnesses and firsthand experience. But still, I don't know the ins and outs. I just know the patterns. I know that the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that reach out to me, always the same. They lost a loved one, they lost a son or a daughter or husband, or had a near-death experience, all in that same area that I'm dealing with is what brings these orbs. Now, I don't know why an alien would care about you dying, and or why an alien would care about me fishing on the bank of the river when I'm crying out to God to help me, and then these balls of light come. So I can only speak to my experience, but I'm not about to say there's not other things going on, because there clearly are. And I think it'll be a long time before we can ever, dig into that enough to understand who and what we're dealing with. But I can tell you there is a spiritual beings that live above us. They live here. They're in the air above us, and they come. If they don't have to come from anywhere other than appear, and I think they're always there. We just can't see them until they want us to, and they're totally in control of who sees what and who understands what. Without experiencing it, you really don't have a clue. All you can do is speculate until you experience this firsthand. It's just imagining and guessing. But even after experiencing it, leaves you guessing. But you get this awakening, this knowledge all of a sudden. I'm not alone, and that is so powerful that it changes a person inside. It changes their heart. It makes them better stewards of the land, better caring and loving to one another. I have thousands and thousands of followers, and literally hundreds and hundreds of people that seen this with me. And there's a lot of them on here I'm seeing now, and some that'll be with me this week that has experienced this before, and it's changed them. They're completely changed. They make amends with family members, and it just makes a better human out of us, I think. But I hope I could shed some light on that question. I just don't have experience in, the alien part of it.
Well, this is very interesting, Chris, because if I understand you correctly, the experiences that you're having are not so explicitly the alien, the UFO, the
Right,
ETs from star system XYZ.
right,
You're
exactly.
really encountering with Our Lady and the orbs spiritual
Yes,
intelligences
yes,
that are part of the Earth's spiritual ecology.
yes.
That be accurate?
100%. And to dig more into that, and I don't talk about this a whole lot, but you know Steve Bassett, right? You've met
Of course.
Ali, his friend Ali, right? And Ali experienced a major miracle, and it happened when he came here with his father was dying of cancer. He had two kinds of cancer. Steve Bassett brought him here, and we walked out the end of my little shop, and I looked up at the heavens, and I said, Ali, I'm going to pray for your father right now. And when I did, immediately lights started appearing. Everybody saw it, Steve too. And when Ali gets home, his dad's out walking around. And when he takes him to the oncologist, he has no sign of either leukemia or prostate cancer. It was gone. So this is the phenomenon that I'm dealing with. These kinds of things.
Gotcha.
It's not the alien side of it, although that could be what it is. But I don't understand it that way at all.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, let's bring Bertie in and David, because they have, like you, very specific experiences in these matters. And again, everyone, we're just trying to explore who are we dealing with here. And so Bertie, you first, and then David. Based on what Chris just said, your encounters, Bertie, as I understand it, are more on the ET side, not the spiritual intelligences side.
I would say that all the experiences that I've had in my life, both as a remote viewer and just as a human being, having encounters with something that's non-human, that these encounters have been both extraterrestrial to me and deeply spiritual. They seem to have both components. What's interesting to me is that I feel that this entire universe is so full of so many different kinds of life. In remote viewing, you can examine the most furthest advanced civilization from our own planet and have a dialogue with the beings that live very far away that maybe have never even heard of Earth or come to our planet. It's incredible what we can do with our own minds in this. And I think that we tend to categorize and classify all of these different kinds of encounters in ways that make sense to us as human beings. We see them through our own human lens. So it's easy to say, okay, this being seems to have come out of a spaceship, a flying saucer, say, so he must be from another planet. Maybe that's not true. And you may see have an encounter with a number of floating orbs that feel as if they're responding to you in some way. Maybe they even give you a deeply personal and spiritual message. So it's easy to see them as being spiritual entities and not extraterrestrial. But we simply don't know. And it's also easy to use our own human lens to ascribe motivations to all of these different beings. One thing that I did over the past few years, I spent around 2.5 years on a big project and did over 250 remote viewing sessions on the alien abduction phenomenon, with, of course, Kathleen just spoke so eloquently about, and her work is incredible in this area. And when people describe these encounters, sometimes they're terrified. Sometimes over time, if they have a number of these encounters going through their life, they sometimes come to a different kind of understanding about what this process actually is involving and what it means. So I looked at the alien abduction phenomenon, not from a human perspective and not from even an objective perspective as an outsider. I looked at it through the eyes of the ETs themselves who are engaging in this activity. So I did over 200 sessions looking at it through their eyes to understand what's really going on here, what's their perspective, what are they trying to accomplish. And the results were absolutely fascinating and kind of turned it all upside down and on its head for me. So I think that when we think about all of these different kinds of beings and try to classify them, I think that we're making some mistakes and we're basing these kinds of decisions on our own human understanding, how we see our own Earth around us. So I think that there's a lot for us to learn here and a lot for us to explore.
That's very interesting. And Sean, I want to bring you back in after we finish with people here. But this is what Bertie is saying is that our taxonomy is our taxonomy. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the taxonomy, that there's a difference between our subjectivity as we enter the experience and the experience itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, for
Bertie?
sure.
Yes, absolutely.
And you would agree with that, Sean?
Absolutely. And, even within the context of our taxonomies, some are better than others, right? So how much self-reflection are we building into it? How much, kind of different types of input are going into it? I think one of our starting points is to create the best, most self-reflective and nuanced taxonomy we can, and then to continue to be in dialogue with these beings to, understand how might they see it all. I think we want to be cautious about our human-centric perspective, but at the same time, we're humans, and so there's a certain, appropriateness to us having a human-centric perspective. We just don't want to be doing it in a reductionistic or problematic or,
Exactly. But in an
unnecessarily
open-ended way.
unhelpful way.
Yeah, an open-ended way.
Yeah.
And before, we're going to get to you in a second, David, but I want to get Richard back in to get his comment on this. Richard, where would you come down on this interface between what Bertie just articulated and Sean? How do you come out on it? Oh, so we can't hear you.
I was muted. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, I think everyone's had very valid points here, and I'm not sure I would say it's a matter of who's right and who's wrong in this matter. Definitely, when we're trying to, when we're thinking about the presence of other intelligences that appear to be here with us, I think that's something we can all certainly agree on. We want to ask and speculate. This is a completely legitimate and I would say necessary thing to do. To the best of our ability, is who are they? What do we believe their intentions are? What are they doing? It's a simple thing. So, and for that, you're going to have to use human-centered motivations to some extent. It's unavoidable, and there's nothing wrong with that, frankly. My reason is that if I look at the mass of, let's say, UFO, UAP reports around the world every year. So this is something that I study, and I try to track that, and I try to map them out. And I'm asking myself, what is this operation? It's around the world. It involves every body of land, every body of water. It often involves interactions directly with human beings, and more. It involves interactions at times with Earth's ecosystem and many other things. So my question simply is, based on what the data seems to be telling me on that, and that whole big picture, what does it look like they're doing? And for that, one has to speculate. My assumption, as I've said before, is that life is probably quite abundant in this universe, and that intelligent life is probably quite abundant in this universe. And that, it wouldn't be surprising at all that there would be a large number of genuine societies that are more technologically, scientifically advanced than our own, and that have figured out a way to visit us, and that they find us interesting. That, to me, is the simplest explanation. Now, there are many non-local aspects to what's going on here. Like, I listened very carefully to what Chris had to say, and he made perfect sense in everything he said, and Bertie as well. And there's clearly a non-physical element to this reality that we're all experiencing. I've experienced it myself, and I don't need to be convinced that it's real. So the question, though, is, what exactly are we dealing with? Who are these guys? Are all of the interactions that people have had psychically, telepathically, are these all evidence of extraterrestrials, or is there something else? My
Yeah.
personal opinion is actually exactly in line with, I think, what I've heard from everyone, which is there's an abundance of types of, I wouldn't say types of life, I would say types of intelligences that exist in this reality of ours. And I don't know if I'll ever have a full handle on what all of those intelligences are, how they exist in another dimension. Do I understand that truthfully? No, I don't completely understand it. I hope and expect that when I shed this mortal coil, I'll have a better handle on it. So, but is that the same thing as the UFO or UAP phenomenon? This I'm not convinced of. I think that there are non-local elements to the UFO intelligence, alien intelligence. So we have to consider that. But I suspect that there's other things that are going on here. And from my point of view, this is just me. Other people are able to investigate this to their heart's content. It's valid. But when I'm looking at the UFO phenomenon, what I call UFO phenomenon, I have to ask myself, what are we dealing with? Who are these beings? Where do they come from? Do we have anything to worry about or not? All of the types of questions that would affect us in this reality, in this density, this dimension. And that is, I'll just say bluntly, that is my number one concern. I want to understand who these beings are. And I tend to think they're physical to the extent that we're physical. They could be cybernetic, they could be artificially constructed, they could have the ability to interact with our space-time reality in ways that we can't. So they could be interdimensional in that sense. Enter our dimensional reality, leave our dimensional reality. I'm not sure if that means they're interdimensional in the same way that we tend to think of interdimensional. So I think of them as physical first and foremost, and that means with an agenda. And that could be a positive from our point of view or negative from our point of view, could be indifferent. My sense, the last thing I'll just say here is, when I look at the thousands of reports that I've read through very carefully, by and large, I think 90+% of the time, they want nothing to do with us. That is what it looks like to me. They've got their agenda, they got their thing to do. They don't want us bothering them. And that's that. On occasion, they will interact with us on their terms, it seems to me.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's discomforting in a way, everyone. 99% of the time, these beings aren't interested, because I think we want them to be interested in us in a more deep and abiding way. Let's go to David Clements now, who you'll remember from last time, is a physicist, but has had very direct experiences with these different beings. David, same question. Where do you, in terms of your experiences with these intelligences, where do you find yourself in the taxonomy?
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me back. It's a really great honor to be here amongst all these wonderful speakers. And yeah, it's an amazing mix of different perspectives. And what I'd say is that, first of all, I think a little micro discussion about the energy physics, if you don't mind, and then moving into the question you just asked, because I think it's very prevalent for the next aspect. So as a physicist, I used to be involved wholeheartedly in sort of frontier physics, string theory research, quantum field theory research. And so my head was very much in that game, so to speak. And I had this experience of remote viewing. And it absolutely triggered on this ability to remote perceive and perceive in a bandwidth or a sort of, to be able to perceive energetics that I never could do before. And that was the kick-on moment when I had experiences with these races. And what they began to teach me and to help me expand my understanding on was that what we think of as physics is really just a phrase to describe the behavior of energy. And now, in all these wonderful discussions that are going on, for me, I would say that it's so important to get these perspectives out, because it's obviously lots of perspectives and a very rich, overview of things. But I would say that from my experience with my teams, as I call them, because there's quite a few of them. Firstly, the situation they describe and what I've seen for myself as somebody who has been grounded in the physics aspect, the theoretical physics, is that the universe or experience is simply a multitude of different expressions of intelligent energy. In that way, they can take a more compressed, more densified form in being matter, like a physical body or something like that. But it goes right the way up the scale to incredibly expansive, nebulous, and living fields, and everything in between. And when I communicate with these beings, I use something which they taught me, which is a form of bilocation, where I can physically be here, but I can go up and I can talk to them, have conversations. I can be shown around their vessels and so forth. And it's really quite important, because the perception that I've gained from meeting with these beings is that everything is living energy. Now, sometimes when it becomes so densified, it can appear to be so unintelligent and almost mechanical, like it just bangs off stuff, it doesn't do very much and what have you. But that's just really down to the compactification and the compression of the energy field, making it behave in a way that looks, sort of unmanaged, if you will, by a living intelligence. But all energy is living intelligence. And these beings have the ability to change their energetic configuration to be more fluid, more physical, up and down. They can morph like that, do a lot of different things. And most of the occasions when I have meetings with them, there are beings on board that have physical bodies, but I can also detect and sense the presence of this vast energetic collective with them that are working with them, and also slightly overseeing the work that they do. And so there's this vast collection, like look at the speakers we're speaking about so far, of different aspects of this. It's colossal, it really is. And like I say, and one of the things that they were really, particularly the Arcturian aspect, and the Pleiadian aspect, these are beings, in my experience, that have a very, very heart-centered connection. And so there is a gateway in the heart center, which I call the Sacred Heart. And within there is a gateway, which is direct access to the source intelligence or the creator intelligence within. And what they were telling me is that essentially when you practice, and this is something that they're encouraging humanity to do, when you get back that connection, that living source connection, you have access to perceptibility of such a vast range, the inner workings of matter, the inner workings of fields and other things like that, which they do. They have such an immaculate perception of so much in terms of energy and fields. And the groups that I work with are very, very keen on helping humanity self-empower. And I've never, ever gotten a sense that there was an agenda of them, because you see, they explain this. It's that when you are sufficiently connected to that source intelligence, not material or mechanistic or even brain intelligence, so to speak, because what I've come to see of brain intelligence is, when it's used as an instrument that is an extension of that core intelligence, it works immaculately well. But they said it can get quite destructive if that connection is lost or severed. And so there are many races out there which have either lost that connection, or it's sufficiently diminished, where they have these agendas where, like Richard was saying, where they can be, not so nice or indifferent or so forth. But the beings that I've connected with are such a powerful connection to that source core intelligence. They have an innate wish to see that and help cultivate that in other beings. Now, yeah, you could, I mean, from a certain point of perspective, say, well, that's their agenda. I wouldn't call it an agenda. I would say that that is the living intelligence within the universe wanting to uplift other aspects of intelligence within its creation. And so, yeah, it's a very complex and very rich field, but I think it really comes down to a very simple thing. And the Arcturians said to me this once, and they were helping me to design and build a certain device. And I was trying to, deal with this mentally and try to work out all the nuts and bolts mentally. And I kept losing the perspective of what they were showing me, and I was getting a bit frustrated. And they came in and they said, look, you this is part of your learning. You have to learn that there is a world of difference between approaching things from a mind intelligence, trying to figure out the nuts and bolts, and then coming from a core perceptibility intelligence, which has access to a vast amount more than the material brain can ever access. And when you do that, whole vistas are going to open up, not just for you, but the whole human race, they were saying. And I think this is why they're actively looking and trying to encourage people to get down into the core intelligence. Because another way of seeing this is that how does, I kind of touched on this in when I spoke last time, how does matter organize itself? Is it just a rough tumble, bunch of particles banging around and just, organizing themselves? In chaos and trying to settle some pockets in an ordered way? Or is there something inside and within the matter, within the fields that support the matter, that's actually intelligently organizing them? And that really depends on the level of density that you're in. So at our level of density, it's so densified that that level of intelligence doesn't appear to have much effect. So that matter appears to be just like, stuff bouncing on each other, solid walls, you hit it, you get your hand hurt, all that physical stuff. But when you start to operate in a higher level and you start connecting with the core intelligence, the very nature of matter itself starts to change. It becomes less dense, more fluid, and it starts to mimic and morph itself much more easily. It's like the grips are coming off and the energy can start to expand and move in different ways. And so the level that these ETs operate at is that and beyond. They have such a capability to fluidly morph themselves and do all manner of things, which I think lends itself to many of the perspectives that have been shared here so far. And I think it's just as a last point as well about the ethics of ET contact. I would say that anyone who's looking to connect, and I think large-scale connection is coming, and I think the point where we're going to meet these beings is fast approaching in my perspective. Is it make it clear who it is you want to connect with? Are you looking to connect with those who are benevolent, heart-centered, and who have a wish to connect with other living intelligence, source intelligence like themselves, and and collaborate? And that's what my core intelligence within me said. Just make it very clear who you want to connect with, and that's the way it moves forward if you wish to. And so there is this ethic about how you can do this, and I believe it's that simple. And then you just have fun with the experience and explore.
Thank you, David, very much, because you're you're blurring the taxonomy delightfully.
Sorry.
And I love this. And we're going to have Hakeem Isler and Sarah Gam join us now. But before we do, Chris, I'd like to have you back on and Bertie, because what David is saying is that the energetic quality of what we're dealing with is sort of the, let's call it the substrate. And that then they manifest in different manifestations in the kind of the material world. So while I first thought, Chris, that you were dealing with intelligences as separate from the ETs, what David's saying is that's not so clear. That the manifestation in these spiritual realms is as much of a possibility for them as coming in on a nuts and bolts spacecraft that lands in Roswell. So I just wanted to get the two of you, and Hakeem and Sarah, you guys can come on now as well. But I want to get both of your comments on that, because in some ways the mystery is now deepening.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of mystery there, right? And I'll be the first to tell you, there's a lot of mystery around it. But what I will add is that 18 years of this, I've seen a lot. In other words, 18 years ago, over 18 years ago, I was crying out and something came and helped me, right? Here I am today, a different human. I was healed. It came and healed me from Crohn's. But during that 18 years, I have seen orbs do some amazing things. I have seen them morph into airplanes. I've seen them morph into helicopters. I've seen beings come out of them that are glowing and then turn into these shadowy figures and walk across the yard. Not only me, other people with me have seen this. We saw on television orbs and drones, and the orbs were mimicking the drones. They were turning into them, taking on their form and flying away. There's reports in the old days, in the 1800s and older, of flying wooden boats in the sky with glowing sails like the Mayflower, and skyships, they called them, and triangles. And remember, Kenneth Arnold in 47 said it looked like a saucer skipping on the water, and the news said, oh, it was a flying saucer. So for 40 years, everybody talks about that, and that's all we see. Then suddenly it changes to triangles. And for 10 years, everybody's seeing triangles, no more flying saucers. And now it's orbs. In 2018, or in 7 and 8, Stephenville, Texas, in 08, they had orbs that turned into machines and flew away. So I don't know what it is we're dealing with, but I do know the lady is associated with this part of it. And healings and blessings come with that side of it. But I'm still confused as to what we're dealing with, other than the beautiful part that I experienced from it. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, what seems to be emerging is that whatever it is objectively, it has the capacity to morph in a way that the particular human encountering it is either ready for or is seeking, which comes back to David's, I think, seminal point. That, be careful what you ask for.
Right.
You need to really, really pay attention to what you want, because that's that intention goes a long way in determining the nature of your experience.
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. A quick word, Bertie, and then we'll go to Sarah, and then Hakeem. If you're there, would love to have you join as well. And then we're going to open it up. And I know we're running a little late, and I know, Richard, you need to leave. momentarily at the bottom of the hour, but I hope that everyone else can stay because this is so rich. We're going to push a little bit beyond the 90-minute mark just because this is really incredible. So Bertie, and then Sarah, and then Hakeem.
I really love what David had to say about keeping this heart-centered. I think that's extremely important. But one thing I'd like to point out in this conversation, we're talking about the ETs, interdimensional beings, spiritual beings, trying to figure out what they are. But I think that all of this is reflected in humanity as well. Who are we? Are we not physical and spiritual beings ourselves? Don't we have physical activities that we do, encounters that we have, and don't we also have deeply spiritual experiences? So we also float between both worlds, both kinds of existence. And I just wanted to point that out. We are just like all of those other incredible creatures and beings out there. We are able to be both physical and spiritual all at once.
You know, that's a very important point. You know, take love, for example. That's not physical. That's completely spiritual. And yet it's the most intense part of our reality when you feel it, right? So they are what we are. And what you're asking for depends on who's asking and why.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and Sean, I don't know what that does to your taxonomy, but this is very rich, everyone. This is very rich. So Sarah, and then Hakeem, what's your, yeah, you can come on, Sean. Everybody can come on now because we want to really dimensionalize this after Sarah and Hakeem um, discuss, make their presentation. But Sarah first, and then Hakeem, what do you make of this discussion so far? Where do you come out on the relationship between the objective phenomenon and our subjective experience of the phenomenon, and the capacity, apparently, of the phenomenon to shapeshift? Sarah, and then Hakeem.
Yeah, so there have been so many amazing comments that I've been like adding on to people while I've been muted, and this has been incredible. I feel so honored to be a part of all of the panelists here, or as like you like to call us, Jim, the principals, which makes me feel nice because I've been a part of principals committees for like White House meetings and stuff. So feel fancy again. Um, so I actually have observed the changing, like an orb changing into what appeared to be a helicopter. And then what I found out through one of my friends was the reverse Doppler effect. And that has been a known thing for many decades now. And I didn't realize it at the time. And but it made sense because my science brain kept on saying this is a helicopter. There was actually a pair of them, and both of them were acting kind of differently. And one had a spotlight, wasn't searching. And then all of a sudden, as soon it got close to us, it got really, really loud, and my camera on my phone stopped recording. And then as soon as the pair passed over, and we're in like kind of a populated spot. It was around the time when the drones were happening. It was right before Christmas. They disappeared. They were just gone. Like the sounds were gone. Everything was just gone. So, and then actually I have been out in a cabin all weekend, and I saw an orb myself. And as soon as we're talking about ethics, right? Like I feel like it happened for a reason. Now I've been watching this and like listening to everybody. The orb itself. So for those that don't know me, I am an astrophysicist, master's in countering weapons of mass destruction. I spent almost 18 plus, I think actually more than that, 18 years in the intelligence community. So I'm an intelligence analyst and was a part of the UAP task force. I supported it from a very small corner. So my science brain is like, all right, which direction are the satellites typically going? But I'd been outside for a while that night, and I saw an orb go opposite direction, lower altitude, definitely wasn't a plane. And as soon as I got my phone out to hit record, it changed course, and it wasn't gradual. I mean, it was gradual. It wasn't like a sudden pivot, but it changed course and started kind of going further away. Like it was like, I don't want you to record me right now, but that's ethics, right? So like maybe I should have asked permission before I started recording, or else I might have seen it more. So I thought that was really interesting seeing that and then coming on here. all of the other discussions, you guys have made such amazing comments. David, you talking about heart intelligence. I'm probably going to use that term a lot in the future. So I appreciate that. And I liked how you and I think somebody else, I forget which other person, you guys have made such good comments. They've all been like muddled together in my brain. But the comment about asking to make contact. And so what I've actually experienced is not quite opposite, but I open my heart to love and light and I let nothing but that come in. So I approach it not quite from, a different lens, but like, no, I want to talk to an Arcturian today. I don't do that. It's I want to know what I need to know now for my best and highest good, and only love and light is allowed to come in. And so while I'm meditating, I'll actually have possibly different alien races and come talk to us, or come talk to me. Well, sometimes in group meditations, they come and talk to us too, and we have group experiences. Um, so it's everything everybody said is so beautiful, and I loved the, nature, everything is conscious. I mean, water. We know that now that water is a proven scientific study to have consciousness and to give us messages. And plants and nature, like nature is so healing and grounding, and we came from nature. We have nature inside of us. So how cool is it now that we have science proving that trees, aspens talk to each other. And we've come such a long way. And I know we're running out of time. So I'm trying to speed talk through all this amazingness that everybody has said. But again, thank you for having me on here.
Thank you, Sarah. The point that you're making about the highly differentiated experiences that you've had indicates once again that the observed and the observer are inseparably intertwined with one another. And it works in terms of quantum mechanics, but it's also apparently working in terms of our experience of the taxonomy. And where the taxonomy ends and subjectivity begins is I think the next phase of our inquiry in some deep way.
Yeah.
So
I don't think there is a beginning or ending though, really, Jim. We are all one, and we have to figure out, our human brains like to put things in buckets and to categorize stuff. And so we need a beginning and ending because our temporary lives are begin and end, but we're eternal souls, right? So it is an interesting concept to try to switch our mindset, our reference point. Same as when you see parallax from a video, you're riding in a car, something close to you seems to be going at a different speed or rate than something far away. If you're looking at a mountain in the distance, it's not going to be moving very fast, right? But a tree that you're passing by is going to be zooming by. So I think it's a matter of that we're trying to help change the perspective of the globe.
Yeah. Thank you. We're gonna move beyond the 90 minutes just because this is so rich. And Richard, I know you have to drop off.
It's okay. I'm not gonna bail.
Good. Well, we'll go another 15, 20 minutes, but I want to now introduce Hakeem Isler. Hakeem, you may all know, is the founder of the Psi Games. I think he may be the only one amongst us who's been trained as a ninja and at levels, everyone, that, it's worth having Hakeem just tell his story some other time because we're pressed on the matters of substance today. But Hakeem, what would be your general orientation to this question that I think is really at the heart of the discussion today about this relationship between the objective mystery that we're exploring and the way human subjectivity shapes the experience? Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, I love that. I think that there were several different things that people talked about here today, which really kind of highlights where we are in this kind of perspective of what we're looking to figure out in the grand scheme of this. And, here I am in Fayetteville, North Carolina with my loving friend, Chris Bledsoe. He lives here too. And I had my first UAP experience with him at his house. And one of the things that I remember him telling me was first off the bat was, try to stay filled with love and light and try to, just be open to the possibilities. And that was one of the things. And that hits really much upon what Sarah was talking about. But to cover so much in such a short amount of time is really tough to do. But what I will say is that we are multidimensional beings. The yogis would talk about us being not just physical beings, but having a part in the subtle plane and then having a part in the causal plane. And so we have these three different aspects to us. And when we start looking at how big and how broad the universe is as a whole, and now all of the planets that we're discovering that might have life and things of that nature, then what we can determine and what we can say is that there's a multitude of possibilities that could be existing all at the same time. And from my PSYOP background, for those of you who don't know, I was in the Army. I was a PSYOP specialist. One of the things that we would try to tend to posit and play with when we were coming up with different ideas on how things, maybe somebody was using PSYOP on us as a country or a group. What are these things, or what's behind that? And so we always tried to stay in this way of thinking where we have four possibilities, and the possibilities was whatever I think it is exactly what it is, right? So it could be exactly that. Whatever I think it is could be a combination, or whatever I'm seeing could be a combination of what I think it is and something opposite of what I could think, right? So it's a combination of two things. It's like the opposite. It could just be the opposite. So that's number three. So it could be what I'm seeing, it could be the opposite, or it could be a combination. And then the fourth was whatever I'm looking at could be so totally out of my realm of understanding that it would blow my mind. It would be like the conspiracy theorist that comes up with this idea that turns out to be true, and nobody thought it was possible or saw that coming, and it was there. And so when I look at this type of situation, one of the things or what we're trying to determine here, one of the things I try to stay open to is that all of our different perspectives could be absolutely right and could also have little twists to them, because we're dealing with multi-dimensions. We're dealing with many beings, types of beings, many different possible motivations, many different encounters. And so staying open to what it could be, but then also using good reasoning and logic in the scientific method to really kind of land on some things, but then staying open to those things might change too, because there were times that we thought that we revolved around, or the sun revolved around us, and everybody was like super believing that, right? We all felt like that was the answer. And then somebody came up with a different concept, which was just the opposite of what everyone else was thinking, and it turned out to be true. And so when you have this many levels going on at the same time, it behooves of us to be able to have these philosophical discussions rooted in our own subjective experiences, but then also staying objective and open to the possibility that we may be wrong or a little bit right, or it could totally flip us on our heads because we're dealing with multiple things. So we might be correct in one sense with one being, but then there's other beings out there in which our subjective reality and even objective opinion may not be beholden to that being or that entity or whatever the case may be. And that's where I love when Chris and I have these discussions, that he said it here today, where you have this perspective of, this is my experience with the lady and this is what I know, but over my time, over my years, and I hope I'm not butchering what he said, is there's other things happening out there, and I may not know about those things. It sounded like David was also hinting on that, and then of course Richard was talking about that as well. So that would be my take on it.
Well, thank you. Let me build on what Hakeem said and summarize the conversation so far, and then pose the final question. If what Hakeem is saying and others, that we're in a reality in which human subjectivity and sort of cosmic objectivity blend together such that we're in an open-ended universe, not a closed universe. And we can be shape-shifting our experience as the doors of perception open and close and morph. We're in a reality, it seems to me, in which Sean's taxonomy is absolutely correct. And the opposite is also true. It's all one. And these different categories can shape-shift into other categories at will, depending on what Hakeem just said. We can be right here and wrong over here and half right. And we're really entering, I think, in both enhanced clarity and enhanced mystery simultaneously as we open ourselves up to this extraordinary experience of non-human intelligences. So where I want to focus this is that given that, and I want to go back to what Richard said at the beginning, that in his judgment, which seems to me to be commonsensically correct, that intelligence is everywhere, that where life is, intelligence is. Whether it's water or the species Homo sapiens or a flower or a UFO or a fairy, in the woods, that seems to be a characteristic of life, is intelligence. And so the surmise is that they're probably no different in fundamental ways than any intelligent life is. But what that also means is, to David's point, that the great teaching of human beings over the ages and across cultures is that the most elevated disposition of being and intelligence is love. That in fact, as we move into this domain, we have to be as careful about what Sarah was saying about how we're opening ourselves up to this, because it's our disposition of being that's actually shaping our experience. And if we go out there in a national security frame, we're liable, if what Hakeem is saying is correct, to bring a national security reality into our subjective experience. So this means, as I'm understanding this conversation, that it is the disposition of our interior that may in the end be more important than anything else. That may not be correct, but I want to open this up now to all of us. And I want to beseech everyone to be as brief as we can, because I think that the interactivity between us is going to be really important. But I'm going to start with you, Richard, since I drew from your comments at the beginning in terms of my summary. How do you view the point that David's making, that we're being called upon to develop our own ethics, our own guideline, our own openness, independently of the objective reality out there, because our openness will shape the experience that we're seeking to achieve? Does that make sense to you or not?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, it's very important that we as a species develop something better in terms of our species-wide ethics than what we've had. I mean, when you don't have to be an expert in human history to know that our species has never, ever ceased engaging in mass murder, warfare, oppression, genocide, going back even before we could write. We've been doing this. it is just what you could say what we have been and what we are. We are an incredibly territorial and violent species. Of course, I don't know how much different that makes us than most other animal or even plant species when you really think about them. They're all territorial. They all are, engaged in their own survival needs, and they will encroach on the other life species. We just happen to be really good at it because we got these hands and we can create tools, and we evolved an intelligence that kind of got in a positive reinforcement feedback loop, that the smarter we got, the more we were able to manipulate, and on, and we broke the game of the planet. We broke the system, the ecological balance. And so we're now headed toward what's probably Earth's sixth great mass extinction. I mean, it's happening. It's probably happening, I'm guessing. So all of these things are going on, and we as a species are not doing a very good job at managing our stewardship, if we want to call it that, of this planet. It's going very badly, very badly. I suspect when I look over the history of what we can call UFO sightings, yes, there is a very good case to be made that they, whoever we want to say that they are, have been here for a long time. But it's also, to me, obvious that there is a massive transition during the middle of the 20th century, during and after the Second World War, where we start seeing massive numbers. That's with aerial phenomena, that's with USOs, it's with everything that I can imagine. And I tend to think that that is because during the 20th century, we humans became unbelievably dominant over our control of this planet and our ability to destroy this planet. So all of that just went, exponential. And I have always suspected that's why they're here. They're checking us out because they realize, oh, these humans who never stop, they keep pushing, they keep going. They are now going into this hyperbolic exponential growth, and they're going to be leaping into our world any time now. Let's see what they're up to. And they're really violent and aggressive, by the way. So all of that. So we've got to, unless we want to go extinct because we're undercutting a global ecological balance and we may nuke ourselves to death, all of these things force us to consider new ways of doing what we do. And that's the problem, because we're still human beings, and we still really only just yesterday came out of the forests. And we're still like, we are what we are. So unless we can figure out a way to actually change human nature, and I believe that there's a human nature, we're gonna have a tough time of it. Now, the other question that you were bringing up is our intention in how we approach these other beings the most critical aspect of the engagement? And I don't know if I agree with that. I might respectfully disagree. I do think it's important that we have, our best intentions, whatever they are, when we deal with these beings. But I don't think, I'm doubtful that our intention is the most important quality in that interaction. I think there is a danger in that, and it tends to give us a lot more power than we may think we have. And this is my own feeling of it. And forgive me for saying this, but I think there's a certain hubris involved in this idea that we somehow, with the power of our intention, can influence these other beings to the degree that we think we can. I just don't know about that. It would be like, an animal, maybe of less cognitive capability than our own, that has this idea that, oh, I can influence how these human beings are. Like a chicken would say, if I just approach these humans with a loving intention, maybe they won't put me in a cage and sell me.
Good point. Good point. Good
So it's
point.
like, how much power do we really have in this?
Yeah.
I just don't know. I'm not saying it's insignificant, but we have a planetary wide crisis that we are in this dimension, in this reality right now. And whereas I believe in dimensions beyond this, I definitely believe in that, and gives me a lot of comfort in this life of mine, believe it or not. But in this reality right now, there are some serious issues going on. And the last thing I'll just say here, I've talked too much already, is that I think a lot of our perspectives depend on the kinds of questions that we are putting to this phenomenon. So we don't all have the same questions. And we shouldn't have the same questions, because this is an incredibly mysterious and deep, profound phenomenon that we're dealing with. That is the phenomenon of other intelligences that are certainly here interacting with us. There's a lot there, and it's enough for many, many lifetimes of inquiry. With our, and I have to say this, our limited ability to understand that. So I happen to have a question that focuses on, I'll just say the here and now. So that is, I look at the thousands of UFO reports around the world, and I ask myself, what are they doing? What does it look like they're doing when they're coming in and entering and emerging from oceans, or when they are entering someone's bedroom, or when they are hanging out 200 feet above your neighbor's house at 2:30 in the morning, dead silent in the middle of the night? What's that all about? It's like, I want to know, I want to understand their behavior, their physical here and now behavior as intelligences that are operating in my reality. I want to know. And so for that purpose, I'll ask certain questions, but they're different questions than what many other people will ask. And it's not that my questions are more valid than anyone else's. I'm just asking a different question. And therefore, I tend to come to a different perspective of it. And it's just because it's like we're dealing with the most profound mystery. I mean, what is bigger than this in terms of its implications,
Yeah. Yeah.
breadth, its depth? So there's a lot to go into here. Last thing I'll just say, I've always got one more last thing, but I
All
firmly
right.
believe that they have a consciousness, that there are consciousnesses that exist in this universe where they just using their mind, or whatever we call their mind, they can detect us. Like in Star Wars, The Force. I am quite convinced they can do this. And I believe this is probably how we were found. It's like, we have SETI looking for signals with radio, but why wouldn't they have the ability to look for our signals via some kind of consciousness connection? And then they're like, oh, that place, Earth over there, let's go check it out, because they're doing things that are interesting. And I strongly suspect that. So it's a faster than light connection. It's the speed of consciousness. And I further believe that consciousness, or intelligence, maybe I'll put it that way, is a substrate of our fabric of reality. I think there's intelligence. It permeates existence. And they are part of it. We're part of it. And they're likely, some of them are more advanced at using it than we are, probably. So we have a lot to learn, but we got a lot of problems to deal with here too. And I don't know that every one of them that are here for to bail us out of pardon me, the shit show we've created. Like, I don't know that is the case. I think they're here to look at humans thinking, man, they're a hell of a show. Are they going to make it or not? And is there anything that we can do about it or not? Because I think we're a very interesting display right now in this whole portion of the galaxy.
Thank you, Richard. What I love about this conversation, everyone, is just when I think I'm getting clear, we go to our opposite and mystery prevails. This is a delicious place for us to all be in. And so I think, in light of what Richard just says, the question is, what's love got to do with this?
I have a
Right?
couple quick comments just to build on.
Yeah,
what Richard
Sean,
shared.
jump right in, and again, brevity,
Yeah.
brevity, so we can get differing points of view. And then I'm going to circle to you, Chris, for your comment on what Richard was saying about our human nature, and then others. Sean.
So one point is, if we think about, how do we cultivate an ethics orienting towards NHI, as Richard's pointing out, we have to take a hard look at our ethics of relating to each other here on this planet. And it's not a very good track record. Like, we don't do a very good job of dealing with people that are different, right? In terms of race, creed, sexual orientation, and any number of other considerations, right? And in fact, it appears we're getting worse at it. Like, things are very polarized right now. So there's this irony in this paradox that, on the one hand,
Exactly,
things are going in a direction there that seems somewhat problematic. And on the other hand, we're wanting to enter into the galactic family as a global civilization. And it seems that a lot of people who are in more direct contact with various NHI than I am are often suggesting that we kind of have to get our show, we got to figure out things here with each other before we're really welcomed fully into the galactic, kind of family, as it were. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it seems reasonable that we got to kind of clean up, our relations with each other before, because when we're dealing with these beings, they are so much different than the level of difference we have amongst ourselves, that if we can't deal with this minor level of difference, then how are we going to deal with the level of difference that seems to be presented by these beings? The other thing is that my sense, based on my experiences and based on, conversations and my research, I do sense that the majority of groups, NHI groups out there, are benevolent or neutral or positive. But it also seems that there are some violent, colonizing, and dominating groups as well, right? And so it only takes a few of those to kind of, make us have to reconsider our, how we approach this writ large, right? So I would be very cautious about orienting to, just the loving, benevolent, spiritual beings and ETs, and not factoring in, some of these more nefarious groups that, have different agendas. And then there's also neutral groups who are just doing what they're doing, but impact us in negative ways. And they might not mean to, or they might not care, but we might perceive them as, being amoral when they're not necessarily being amoral. So I think we need a much more dynamic framework from which to consider a lot of these ethical considerations.
Thank you. So I think what we've heard from Richard and Sean is sort of a realist point of view. So I'd like to turn to you, Chris, and you, David, and hear from you, since you're really committed to this notion of an open-hearted, loving, relational ecology with these beings. I mean, how do you sort of not answer, but what would be your comment on what Richard and Sean have just said? Starting with you, Chris, and then David.
Well, just based on human nature, if you don't have love in your heart, you tend to be one of those that want to dominate and kill everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably who's in charge of all this terrible suffering going on around the world. People that don't have that love in their heart, or if they did, they wouldn't inflict pain on others. So I think it's most important the way this phenomenon can react to us. If we tell the world is evil and we get the world believing that, we might get that. But if we tell the world it's beautiful, at least part of it, and stay away from that dark side, I think we're more likely to get that. And to me, all I can do is share this with others, and I've seen the people change. And involved with the CIA, I've been involved with them and the NASA and all these organizations for a long time. And based on the information I hear in the back, is of all the reports that are issued, there's less than 10 or 15% ever negative. It's usually 85, 90% positive. So there is negative stuff, right? We all know that. But I would say that we need to keep our heart, emotion. In fact, on the History Channel, with scientists this past year on Beyond Skinwalker, we proved the connection between when the orb appeared ground level. They could see it in my brain patterns, right? But where was it coming from? And this is what Dr. James said on television. It's coming from emotion. It's all emotion based. And we've proven that based on MRIs or the brain scans they've done on me. The connection is all emotion. It comes out of the emotion part of the heart. So I'm looking for everything positive, and that's all I've found so far. I haven't found any negative anything. And I would say, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. And seeing people that were were down and out or depressed or sick with diseases and cancers experience a life-changing healing either inside or physically, I'll never stop, and I'll never stop sharing that positive part of it. And I think that one thing I want to mention before I stop here, the lady gave me a message in 2012 and I put it in writing. And that message was, we have two choices. We can go down the route of World War III and Armageddon, which we know what the Bible says about that. It's not good. Or we can take the route upwards to peace and love, and peace will come over this world. But in other words, what she told me, they were going to awaken the people. And when they do, that awaken, and that, by the way, is something I've studied with government, is what is catastrophic disclosure? What is that, right? And I can tell you the government has a term for that, and that is if they don't tell the truth and some war starts and they come down here and stop it all, which they've been told. I gave them that warning, and so did George Washington. Our first president talked about the lady coming to stop this final battle. It's there. It's in the record. It's in the Library of Congress. So, and I didn't know about that when I put this in writing to them, right? So read it. It's there for everybody. George Washington's visit with the lady. And she told him about 3 great perils that would come. And the last one, she would stop it all. And that was kind of the message I gave them, right? And so they know they don't want to chance that catastrophic disclosure. So that's why we're moving the direction we're moving, to unveil this to the world before that might happen. So I said all this because we're not doomed. We have love in our hearts. We have something that will come down and help us. I'm sure of it, based on what I was told and what's happening right now. So we see it in the orbs. They're appearing everywhere, all around the world.
Well, thank you, Chris. You know, and that brings in a whole other dimension, everyone, of prophecy.
Yeah.
And reiterative awareness from George Washington to Chris Bledsoe that
he did it.
Our Lady may in
I
the
mean,
end
it's
save
there.
us.
Nobody knows
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
but
yeah,
the
yeah.
government knows it, right?
Yeah.
I guarantee you, when I told them about the lady, they paid attention, and there's reasons why. And it come from the very first president of the United States. He had a visit by the lady, and for more than an hour in his office. It's amazing.
Yeah. Maybe if only she would visit the current occupant.
Right.
I'm going to need to just say goodbye to everyone. I'm going to listen to the rest of this later, but I must go. I just want to thank everyone.
Thank you, Richard,
for letting me to
Thank you
participate.
So much. We're wrapping it up, everyone, but we want to hear
Bye-bye.
from David, then Sarah and Hakeem, and then Kathleen, and then Bertie.
Yeah, Chris, that was beautifully said. I love what you had to say there, and all the other sharings here. I'm really grateful to be here. It's such a great group, and yeah, I would love to build, and parallel what Chris was saying, because I I would say in a kindly way, I would take a different perspective than what Richard's perspective, which of course is absolutely honored. The way I see it is, and the way my ET friends and my energetic friends have talked to me, is that what is happening with humanity is there's this profound evolutionary process. And what has happened to humanity is there's been such a disconnect over time, part to do with the experiment of humanity, but part to do with people's choices along the way of that experiment, was this gradual disconnection from the heart intelligence. And what they were describing to me was that what happens is the brain loses its ability to be impulsed positively and to be impulsed in a loving, kind, compassionate, and loving, intelligent way. And it then goes into a sort of survival mode. And basically it can start casting around and getting territorial and doing all that. So that has happened. But I totally agree with what Chris was saying and what Sarah was saying, you know, and what's been shared with Birdie as well, and the other guests, that it's really, from what they were saying, I mean, the Arcturians are incredibly advanced technologically. Their technology is so advanced, it's admired throughout the galaxy. It's immaculate. But their word to me all the time is heart-centeredness, heart-centeredness. That is the primary place you need to be. And we're talking about a civilization that has, you know, these are colossally brilliant beings, you know, that do immaculate things. And what it is that the source intelligence knows every individual. It knows every aspect of creation. It knows exactly how to harmonically balance. It knows what this being needs, what that being knows, and it knows instantaneously along all timelines, backward and forward, how to solve these problems. But because of free will, we've had this ability to choose not to follow that and not to do that. And that's where the destructive aspect comes in. So I don't agree that humans are inherently destructive. I think some humans have become destructive because of making choices to be less heart-centered. But like Chris and Sarah, and I get the feeling that the rest of the panelists were saying is that, and certainly from my teams, they always encourage, first thing to do, center yourself in your heart, get to blend with that intelligence and allow everything to come back into that flow. Because when it does, every particle in your body is going to be ordered by that intelligence in a harmonic way. You will think differently, you will feel differently, you will behave differently. You know, and so to me, that is the process. I know there's very many different ways of seeing it, but that's the process for unfolding. All the junk that has been accumulated in the package of human consciousness is pouring out, and it's causing a lot of disruption, but that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's basically clean the space out so humanity can actually return to a fully heart-centered, intelligent living being, so that these beings that want to connect with us will connect with us on that level. They keep saying, raise up, open your heart, let that intelligence within you reach out, and we can connect with you like that. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the way I see things.
Let us hope and pray.
Yeah.
Sarah, final word, and then Hakeem.
I don't know what to add. This has been amazing. I have learned probably just as much as everyone else watching. So, thank you for all the words of wisdom. And I really have enjoyed the discussion of the yin and the yang. And, you know, Chris has mentioned he's had really amazing positive experiences. And as a psychic medium and doing like house clearings or ghost hunts and stuff, I've also had negative. I've encountered negative NHI or more of the malevolent beings as well. They are few and far between, but I have encountered them. So they are there, and they do want more of the destruction route. And I also agree with what David said, that we're not born to destruct here as humans. We're born to evolve and to learn. That's why we incarnated, is to go through this earth school that is so difficult, and to grow and to learn and to come back to a place of love, because most of us have probably had a life on another planet. Some people call them star seeds, and whatever you want to call it, this life isn't the only one that we're living. So I mean, just like children are born loving each other. They're born loving sticks and mud. And then what happens? People tell us that wash the mud off, and sticks aren't good to have. And no, you can't. Thank you. That's my cat. And and so the world beats this love out of us. And so what we're waking up to now, that as a global awakening is happening, we're realizing that kid in us needs to come back out and play again. And we need to go back out in nature. We need to go climb trees and mountains and play in the mud one more time. So I think this talk has been so enlightening for me, and I feel so honored. I keep saying honored, because of being able to learn from all these amazing people here. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Hakeem.
Yeah, thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk. So I'd like to offer again this idea, not as anything national security wise, but then this idea of, maybe it's both. Maybe there's two sides to the story. And so one of the things I'm thinking of that reminds me of this conversation is one of my teachers used to be the bodyguard of the Dalai Lama. And when I was going through my bodyguard training, executive protection training, it was great to get his perspective on things because, when you're protecting the Dalai Lama, this being of compassion and love, like, you can't be like this brute trying to beat up on people who just want to love the Dalai Lama, right? And they might get a little excited and try to come and hug them too long or something like that. So you have to really be love and compassion in an environment like that, which is different from my understanding of like protecting, different types of principals and executives. So that would be one experience, and this idea that the Dalai Lama was love and light and healing, and there were forces that really wanted to destroy that, right? And so there had to be like a culture to help protect him, and protect, what that love and that light stood for. And so there we see the balance again. To Sarah's point, if we come into the world with love and light, and we also, as these beings of pure energy, and potential, and then we're surrounded by a lot of negative people working from that base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs of survival. I want what you got, or it's not enough for all of us. Then then that's what they're learning. And then they go into the world and they start wanting to take, or thinking that there's a lack of resources instead of an abundance. To David's point, to think about the Arcturians, from what I understand, are also a protector culture, and they protect against lower energy. They help protect against lower energy beings that might be out there trying to dominate and hurt different cultures or different beings in different planets. And that's one of their functions from my research on that. Maybe I'm not getting it 100% right, but I believe based on my research that that's the deal. So then when we look at these things broadly, we start to really say to ourselves, there is a balance, and there are different things. And the beauty is that if we can start right now, it seems like we're a little out of balance, where maybe on the heavier, darker side, and this light is starting to really shine, and we're starting to bring it to either balance or move more into the light, which is what I hope. It's one of the things that I hope to see. And I will finish with, when I was young, we had a creative writing thing. I went to a Catholic school, and we had a creative writing, competition. And I grew up in areas where they weren't always the best. And I was around some folks that were some dark individuals. And I remember writing this thing where this guy made this choice upon his death to go to the dark side or go to hell, right? And that obviously raised a bunch of eyebrows, right? And so I had to answer for that paper. And I'm this young kid, and I remember sitting there and I said, look, I've met people who, we're here talking about, love and light, and then we say, oh yeah, there's this dark inner entity, but we don't think about that. But I've met people who really seem to be operating from that space, or they don't even care. They just want to survive. And because they're in an area that really seems like it's surviving in that dark space, then they become dark. But they're not trying to be either or, light or dark. They're just trying to survive. And so let's acknowledge those folks, and let's really come from a place where we see what the full picture is, and then we choose what portion of the picture we really want to paint to be a bigger portion of the canvas. And so in this particular perspective, we see that the full picture is like, oh, okay, there are these lower energy beings. There's a lot of like chaos and a lot of fighting and a lot of anger on some fronts. And then but we are beings of light who want to see positive change in the world, who want to see things grow in this very community-based, loving space. And so we are going to choose to paint more of the canvas like that and put more of that energy out in the world, but not at a lack of acknowledgement of that there is another aspect to the painting, another aspect to who we are, another aspect to what might be out there in the galaxy. And that way, it puts us in a position where we're not caught off guard, and where we can truly be love and compassion because we can see the full scope of what's happening out there in the universe.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I thought just to build on what you were saying there, if you don't mind, just a quick one. One of the things that the beings told me is that the apparency of darkness actually comes from perspective. Again, it's literally about how we operate as perceivers. And they were saying when material or certain levels of fields appear to have a diminished level of the source intelligence in them, the perspective sees it as dark or dim. And they were saying that's where darkness comes from. And that lack of intelligence cannot order. It's because it's almost like just a bunch of, compressed objects sort of going chaotically. They can eventually get chaotic and destructive. And that's where the dark processes come from. And that's why when you shine love intelligence in it, it really automatically reorders. And then suddenly the dark aspects disappear. And that's why they're so afraid of the light, because the way that energy physics, or the way it was taught to me or shown to me, was that it was literally the absence of love intelligence makes us perceive it as dark. But when as soon as that intelligence goes, it becomes bright, it luminesces again. So I thought it was a great point. So I just wanted to say that because you raised such a great point there. I thought I'd add that on.
The observer and the observed.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Let's see, Kathleen, any final point? And I know you will make a final point, but I also want to inquire something that others have said in terms of your own research, sort of what I would call the 80-20 rule, that about 80% is positive and about 20%, but a small but important minority of experiences are experienced as dangerous or traumatic in some way or another. Is that consistent with what your experience shows? Overwhelmingly positive, but an important minority of negative.
Our research indicates that about 20% is highly, highly positive. About 20% is highly negative. And the rest is pretty neutral, according to the statistics that I have. But first, I want to thank everyone for your brilliant insight. I agree with all of you. Fantastic work today. And to me, the most important statement that experiencers receive from non-human intelligence is that they are here because they're concerned that our spiritual growth is out of sync with our technological progress. And when this happens, when this imbalance happens, it could lead to the destruction of the species. So, primary concern. Also, to address the negative and the positive, it's extraordinarily important to project love and to have an absence of fear. Fear is the enemy. When you come into contact with any kind of intelligence, whether it is positive or negative, and you can generally, if you're an experiencer, you can sense that, because experiencers in our studies have indicated the majority are psychic, they are empaths, so they sense the emotions that are around them. They might even be able to channel healing to others. So they have many gifts that are highly positive. And so I think that that's an important point. But it's extraordinarily important to protect ourselves and to draw in positive entities by projecting love and an absence of fear. You have to be in that mindset, in that white light, in that God intelligence, if you want to call it that. But if you are there and you're heart-centered, you have to be heart-centered, then you can have positive contact. And those who do that get positive contact. But if you just go out and ask for anything to come and you're frightened and you're a negative person or a violent person, then you might end up with something that you don't want. So that heart-centeredness, that love, that light, that absence of fear is most important.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Sean, did you make a final comment?
I did. Yeah.
You did?
This has
Okay,
been
then
great.
Bertie. Final word, Bertie.
Yeah, I think that humanity and all kinds of non-human intelligence have been in this beautiful, complicated dance as long as humanity has been around. And we have influenced each other. We oftentimes think about what we're getting from them, but they're getting something from us too. And this is why, like Kathleen mentions, it's important to be full of love and free from fear when you extend your consciousness out to connect, because you have the opportunity to help these other beings evolve. We are all on an evolutionary path, and it's not like we're interacting with perfection out there. We all have a long way to go, including all of these different kinds of non-human intelligence. And sure, we've got your beautiful, loving ones, and we have some that are, complete goobers, just like us, just like humans. It runs the gamut, but we have an opportunity by being our own loving, beautiful selves and helping to lift up all creatures in this entire consciousness field.
Thank you. Goobers. I haven't heard that word in a very long time. Have any of the rest of you met goobers?
No.
Oh, thank you for that. I really want to appreciate this conversation. Let me just summarize very briefly with 2 points that seem to me important for me as I'm evaluating this conversation and the conversation we had in February. The first is that our awareness is growing and becoming more complex, and our natural human instinct is to create these taxonomies because that's what we need intellectually to enable us to understand. And I think what we're becoming aware of is that the finger is not the moon. And I know Sean would probably be the first to agree with this, that he's just tentatively exploring categories which will shape shift as our awareness and knowledge continues to deepen. And I think that's what's so exciting about this moment in history, is that as the most closely guarded secret in history comes to the light of day. And what we're discovering is it's not just a little secret, but it's the biggest awareness in the history of our species since the beginning. We're like tumbling through outer space and picking up different aspects of a very, very complex reality. And so the image that keeps coming back to me is the blind people and the elephant. And as we move around the elephant, it all shape shifts and changes. That would be one thing. The second thing that seems to me empowering in this complexity and in this mystery is what the Stoics said, 2,000 years ago in the Greco-Roman civilizational period. Epictetus said that in the end, there is only one domain over which a human being has complete control. And that is our response to the rest of the reality. And I think that's where what we've been talking about at the end of our first summit and throughout this one is really important, that given the complexity of positives and negatives and yin and yang and light and dark, how we approach this mystery, how we approach this being may not be the final say, because Richard was making a very important point that the chicken can come to us with an open heart, but that doesn't mean it's not going to get turned into, chicken thighs at the supermarket. But I think what it does mean is that as we're embarking on our journey, our capacity to perceive, the intent with which we're opening up our humanity to these experiences will determine to a significant degree the kinds of experiences where we'll end up on the elephant. And because we're teetering on the brink of self-destruction, as we all know, that aspect of ourselves that we're going to now open up to these other beings may, in the end, be a critical determinant in making available to us the very consciousness we're so desperately seeking to deliver us from Armageddon. Because one of the things that I think we all accept as true is that the consciousness that produces the problem can't solve it. And I think what we're experiencing in this ET phenomenon, in all its richness and complexity and layers and tonalities, is an access to the consciousness we need. And that's why I think that this psionic moment, if we embrace it, in my view, with love and appreciation and deep gratitude, will open up to us that spectrum of beings that can catalyze the new consciousness that would enable us in this 11th hour to recreate the world anew. And I think that's embodied in Our Lady. The deep, feminine, sacred divinity, the mother that holds us all. So thank you, everyone. This has been rich. I feel humbled. I bow to all of you for your deep wisdom and incisive brilliance today, and maybe we'll have you back down the trail. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.